Hey guys, welcome back to Super Politics.
Welcome
I'm your
back,
host.
motherfuckers.
Yeah. I'm your host, Decatur Brent, with my co-host Rob Zombie.
yeah. Also known as Steve Daly. How's it going, everybody? I don't know why I fucking ask. You can't respond. And if anyone did respond, you're like driving in your car and you responded, like you use your brain. I can't hear you.
No, tell us about it. Email us what you said.
Yeah. Well, I'm fine. Yeah. No, it's crazy because when in the last couple episodes, they had more of a somber note, and I think that's appropriate. But like, I'm a little bit optimistic about some of the stuff we've been seeing going on recently in recent news. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But, the first thing we want to say is we decided to go ahead and finally drop this episode about the war on drugs we've been promising for a long time.
Yep.
We actually recorded this episode almost a month ago, and we've just been sitting on it ever since. And
Long time.
it's been a while. So it's going to be weird to think about a little bit that, when you're listening to the episode, it's actually everything we said and talked about. It's so relevant to what's going on now, but we didn't even, this was before all the protests started.
Right.
So it was right after, I believe, Ahmaud Arbery, but it was before George Floyd is when we recorded. I think that's right?
Yeah, it was before that, and then obviously way before what happened just recently in Atlanta.
So, terrible stuff continues to happen. On the other hand, there's some real positive signs of change. Like people are being vocal. People are talking to their families. They're just saying like it doesn't really seem like the right time to be silent. That's positive. But there's some more tangible changes. One of the first good news that I saw was that San Francisco's mayor committed to defunding a portion of their law enforcement and reallocating the funds to investment in the Black community.
I saw the LAPD, they did not nearly do enough to where we'd want it, but the fact that they're donating anything to the community and taking it out of the police department, I think is a big sign that we're doing these slow steps at least.
And I think that there's a lot of really good questions that people have about, like, I've seen some people be like, well, why does it necessitate taking money away from the police? And you're actually going to find out a lot about that in this episode. It's actually an incredible history of why police are funded to the extent that they are. But another point so just on a more basic level, whenever you get in these debates about, what should be funded and how should we fund things, and when you're defending yourself saying, no, I think we should defund the police, or, you hear Bernie Sanders now talking about defunding the military, always remember, and I forget who said it, but a budget is a moral document. Anytime that you allocate funds to one thing, you're taking money away from another thing. I don't think it's crazy at all for us to be looking at where are we overspending.
What's real positive is first time in my adult life of really paying attention to politics, do I see that the left is dragging the right. Normally the right always drags the left to be like center right, and we are dragging the right to be center left, which I don't think I've ever seen. So I think that's a real big positive, and a big fuck you to whoever is saying that none of these protests have worked.
About an hour ago, I was reading an article that just came out by The Intercept, and they were anonymously given an email chain that a federal judge had sent out to all the judges in that area. Right. So it's something that the public normally doesn't get to see. And this federal judge was kind of complaining to all the kind of court staff about how Elizabeth Warren wants to get rid of renaming Confederate bases and that kind of thing. And he was complaining about that. What's incredible is apparently after he sent that email to like all the court staff, it was like dead silent for a whole day. And then a humble law clerk, which is like someone right out of law school usually, who works for the judges, replies all to all these federal judges and staff. Yeah. And apparently she was Black, and she said that I'm only one of 5 Black law clerks in this entire circuit, in the federal circuit. And I feel like I needed to take a shot at saying something about this here. And shit, it was like an incredible email. Yeah. I mean, that is like, in any other political climate, I would be terrified to hit that. I think the Intercept correctly called it a career risking email. But the fact that he's even backpedaling in response to a law clerk's email, it's just like, wow, the intellectual debate seems to be, this battle that's going on seems to be, we see victories all over the place for the progressives.
Trump had a Fox News interview where he had to defend of why you shouldn't defund the police. Like, that's if you were to have
Oh my
asked him,
God.
if you were to have asked that question in the Republican primary in 2015, that would have been the most. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people still think it's a ridiculous concept, but that would have been literally like, you are a conspiracy theorist lunacy.
Yeah.
And like, now we have to talk about, okay, maybe not defund them, but maybe, you know, we'll look into fixing some things. Like, these are like, we're talking about far right people saying we have to fix things now.
These conversations a month ago would have been laughed off, and they have been laughed off for 30 years. The only political conversation, like the Black Lives Matter movement, basically the only political conversation about criminal justice was how much more money can we give police. Maybe even bigger news is that Ben and Jerry's just came out with their anti-Trump ice cream, the Pecan Resist. So these Ben and Jerry's guys, I had no idea, are fucking awesome.
Oh yeah, dude, they're hella Bernie people.
And they're out there and they're doing activism all the time. Like, they've been arrested before back in 2016 for, you know, civil rights type stuff. These guys are pretty cool. So go buy Ben and Jerry's. I just bought a Ben and Jerry's today, like, to support them. And I ate a whole fucking tub. And that might be why I'm not feeling good right now.
Probably it, for sure. That was a mistake. Don't buy Ben and Jerry's.
That was a mistake. It was so good. But yeah, you know, I'm not even mad at them though. Like, for that, it was worth it. It's so delicious.
Get it.
So
you got to take down who you can, and some people will just get collateral food poisoning sometimes. Just to add and wrap up, I think you guys will enjoy it. We got a lot of this is, you know, was recorded before the protest, so it's as light as we could make the episode. But yeah, I think that you guys are going to learn a lot, and as we are trying to make you realize more and more every week, if you don't learn anything else from this episode, is that Ronald Reagan is the devil.
Yeah. I like drugs, 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 bitch, drugs, I like.
Hello?
I like drugs, I like.
Well, hello. Is this Christopher?
Can I ask who's calling?
My name is Jeff. I was the Attorney General of the United States of America. Does that ring a bell?
You're the guy who got fired.
Well, yeah, fired. You don't believe everything you hear on the news. It was a mutual, you know. But it now would be a nice time for me, you know, as I have some free time to try some things out. Got your number from one of my officers. I mean, one of our mutual friends.
You want to buy weed?
Marijuana. What is weed?
Okay, you're right. Sorry, marijuana. You're the same guy who.
Son, if you want someone to pick your weeds, you can. What? You can call a gardener for that, but as far as marijuana goes, I've never opposed that.
This drug is dangerous. You cannot play with it. It's not funny. It's not something to laugh about. And trying to send that message with clarity that good people don't smoke marijuana.
Now listen here, son, I'm losing my patience. I'm trying to get some marijuana.
You don't know how much marijuana costs, do you?
What is it, 1,000 a gram? I'm good for it.
Yes, it is $1,000 a gram, and I will take that by Venmo.
Well, what's Venmo? I never heard of Venmo. I was just thinking I'd leave a briefcase full of cash. I didn't want to have to use these kind of resources, my friend, but I have a way to get what I want, whether you want to cooperate or not. And I heard from my narcotic officers that you would be a good resource for this business transaction. And I think that...
narcotic... I gotta go. I'm sorry.
What? I meant...
Have a good day, Keebler Elf.
You'll be hearing from me one way or another. Don't hang up, I love you.
I need my Mary Jane.
I need some Mary Jane.
I like drugs, 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 I like drugs.
Cool.
I like.
And if you're wrong, then you look like an idiot, not me.
Good.
Excellent. Joe Biden says he supports federal decriminalization of marijuana, which would maintain fines but do away with prison or jail time. But he still remains opposed to full legalization, which would remove all its penalties because he's a dick.
Meanwhile, Busty Trump.
Busty Trump.
I'm sorry. I tried it. It didn't work. Okay. Meanwhile.
Okay. Stupid.
All right. Meanwhile, Trump has been swallowing hydrochloroxin pills to hopefully combat a possible COVID-19 scare. That didn't make sense. So in this episode, we're going to talk to you about drugs, and we're going to tell you why you shouldn't do them because they're bad. Say no to drugs. We're going to get into the legalization, the decriminalization, the policies around drugs, and hopefully we can all come out on the other end not doing drugs because they're bad.
Completely sober.
I'm your host, Decatur Brent, with my co-host, Steve Daly, and this is Super Politics.
No. And this is the Left Wing Sobriety Podcast. Straight edge. And that's when we started getting real philosophical. Oh, yeah. You don't know the art we're trying to spit out right now. Art we're trying to spit out right now.
And we're here to say, fuck your liberal, huh? Fuck your liberal, huh?
You're upset that we went to Iraq for oil? Well, too bad. Take a look at your ass. You shouldn't be able to see it that easy.
How it works, lefties have something.
All right. So, guys, we have a very important topic.
Drugs, baby.
Drugs. Can't spell drugs without you. I'm hitting it with the dad jokes tonight.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's why people subscribe to us, is the dad jokes. I think that's what people are in it for.
Definitely. Has to be. There's nothing else. Nothing else worth their while here.
Certainly our little sketch at the beginning didn't do it for him, so couldn't get the great girls from the few weeks ago to help us out again, so
yeah, deal with us, all right?
You have our shit. Anyway, so what were we talking about? Drugs.
So drugs, guys. I like them. You love them. He does them, and she wants them.
And Uncle Sam's trying to take them out of your grubby little fingers.
Listen,
so
I don't know if I mean, Steve, have you ever done drugs?
I sure wish someone would give me some.
Well, I've done enough for the both of us, my friend.
Oh man, no. Look, here's the thing. I think that drugs are, they're just bad for you, man. They're just bad, and you're a bad person if you do them. And and you should think about your fucking life, man. Don't you remember Dare?
Dare, wasn't that a complete flop?
Here's the thing, Dare is a program that was around in the United States for decades. If you're not from the United States and you're listening, it was a program that was started, when? Was it in the Reagan era? I know that Nancy Reagan was involved in it.
Well, Nancy Reagan was the say no to drugs lady. I don't know what she did other than that. Let me look it up here. 1983, so that would have been under Reagan, right?
Yeah. So under the Reagan administration, this program, what does it stand for? I don't even remember.
Dogs always reap drug abuse resistant education.
Okay. That's not what it was really about, though. What it was really about, as we know now, DARE was part of a larger war on drugs that really was started in the Nixon era. The DARE program was started under the Reagan administration.
Definitely.
It was supposed to be to try to help reduce the amount of drug use in the United States. That was its purported purpose. But we know now that it was a lot of propaganda.
Well,
and we're going to get into that.
I mean, just the whole idea. I mean, if someone's addicted to something, just this idea of this is your brain on drugs, like this is addiction. Showing me a video of eggs getting fried on the TV isn't going to stop me from doing drugs. Hearing some old white lady with a bad perm telling me say no isn't going to stop. Like that doesn't help. Addiction is a very serious thing.
Yeah. Do you remember the cartoons?
No, I don't think I ever saw the cartoons.
They had some real fucking corny cartoons.
What's she talking about? nothing. She isn't talking about anything because she's stoned. She's on weed. Most of the things that are dangerous about cigarettes also apply to marijuana, but pot's worse. It makes you lose your memory and motivation. Pretty soon, the things that make you an interesting, valuable person vanish, and then you're left with an empty life, and there's nothing to laugh about.
And there's another part about marijuana.
What's that?
It can lead you to more exciting, harder drugs to come.
What are harder drugs?
Oh, you'll find out, my dear.
In elementary school in the 90s, there was some stupid shit that they would show us, and then they had like police officers come to class. It was a whole thing, man. It was just complete propaganda to try to tell, I don't know if we said it clearly or not, but the whole thing was to try to indoctrinate children in the United States that drugs are basically, they tried to say they're unhealthy. But the implication was like, you're a bad person, if you're involved in drugs.
And it's funny because, I mean, DARE definitely was a fail as far as it didn't stop people from doing drugs, but I do think it left a lasting impression to kind of just almost demonize anyone who does drugs. And I think that was the real danger of it. I mean, it wasn't the Reagan administration who even started the war on drugs. They just really made it a lot worse because Nixon was the one who put it in, right? And even before that, Rockefeller, who whatever he was in New York, he passed a bunch of shit, and he made it, if you had over an ounce of anything, that you were eligible to get life in prison. So I mean, there's a deep history, obviously, of that. But Reagan really did push the anti-drug, messaging to a whole new high that was just a total flop.
Want to try some cocaine? First snort is free.
Give him the cold shoulder.
And honestly, too, just this idea that they're showing us this at a young age probably desensitized a lot of us to the sight of drugs and the sight of drug addicts. Like, I don't necessarily think it really got the point across. Like, I remember seeing people with meth teeth when I'm like 6 years old because of DARE, and I'm like, I'm not going to comprehend this right now. We're far too young to even understand this.
Right. And we can understand, like, intellectually why that's very unlikely to be successful, because if you're in an environment where you have family members and friends using drugs, and if your parents are or whatever, I mean, this is how a lot of this happens. If you're into like serious drugs that, and I say serious, like something more next level, like heroin or something like that, which has been around for a very long time. If you're in a community that uses heroin, like some cop come into your school and showing you a video of like some junkie using heroin is not going to change your mind when like your family member or friend offers you some. Or like the bigger point you were making is, if you're physically and psychologically addicted, these videos aren't doing shit. You know what it's putting you through.
Exactly. And I think that's what they've been able to tell now. It's just like how I mean, the more we learn about the social sciences, and just how our brain works, this idea that you can just tell someone not to do something isn't going to solve anything. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, I just think it's so crazy. So just to like back up what we're saying with a little research right now, I can tell you I found one article pretty easily from the American Journal of Public Health published in June of 2004. It's a research article saying Project DARE Outcome Effectiveness Revisited. I read through it a bit, and basically their conclusion is, our study supports previous findings indicating that DARE is ineffective. So so they conclude that DARE is a total failure. They show that the studies are showing that the main goal of DARE was to reduce drug use, and it just didn't do that. But here's what's so fucking crazy to me. I just learned today. Today I learned, and I think Decatur just learned this too, that they spent $750 million. Yes, that's $750 million a year on DARE.
Just
that's
disgusting. It's disgusting.
That is so much. And think about this. Like, this is what's crazy. All right, let's play a little mind game for a second.
Do you know how many Swiss rolls you could get with that?
No. You know what I think of always when I think of like how astronomical some dollar sign is? $750 million could buy me 750 million hot and spicy McChicken sandwiches.
Wow.
And that's how I think about these things. That would feed so many people for so long. But instead, they were spending it on sending police officers into our classrooms, and they still, I don't know if they're still doing this to the extent, but they did this for a long time, is sending police officers to our
I think
classrooms.
most of the people listening to it, if they're around our age, they definitely remember those police coming into
Right.
their classrooms.
Right.
Yeah, no, that is a shitload of money that, I mean, it clearly just went to waste.
It was more than, but like you mentioned before, it wasn't just going to waste, right? This was a government-sponsored propaganda thing. Like, and what I was going to say earlier is, think about this for a second. If you were like trying to imagine, like, put on your, Red Scare hat, like you've been programmed by the United States to imagine a dystopian type of Soviet Russia that we're all like trained to believe existed. And
more on that later. Go on.
Yeah, exactly. We do want to talk about that more later. But imagining that for a second, like the Russia we all have come to believe in pop culture existed, what would you imagine would be like a school there? You would imagine maybe in like your worst case fears is that there's like uniformed officers in the classroom telling people government fucking propaganda, like government beliefs. Like, here's what you should believe about certain social issues. Right. Yeah. And like that shit was actually, it was happening in the United States of America. And is not, and might still be happening. I don't know what the hell they're doing in schools now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and we'll probably get into this later on in the podcast too. But just this, I want people while we're talking here to think about too, like who defines what is good and what is bad as far as drugs? What is hard and what is a soft drug? Who really defines this? Is it just these government officials who it doesn't affect them, so they can say? I mean, and I think we're noticing now, drug policy is becoming more and more progressive, but it's really only because it's hitting home to more and more senators and more Congress people. So I think it's something to think about is what makes this worse than this? Who decided that, and why do we view these things different? So
yeah, I always thought it was the cool kids at school who decided which one is hard and which one is soft. I thought it was that's where they got their information.
Yes, definitely. You're right. They still decide.
It's always up to the cool kids.
Sits on the panel.
Hey, Fonz.
Hey.
What about this heroin stuff, huh?
Hey. An opioid a day keeps the losers away.
Iggy, I've been thinking about what those kids were saying about drugs not being too good for you.
Shut up! What do you know? I've never felt better.
But we started off talking about DARE because that's a point of reference for at least Americans to be familiar with, and now everyone's familiar with what it is. So we're talking about drug criminalization and decriminalization, but all the politics around drug crimes today. And, and before we get into the details of that, is that even though, I've mentioned to you before that I'm a criminal defense attorney, anything I talk about in this podcast is not legal advice, because I'm talking about politics. And although we're mentioning crimes and this and that, you should not, absolutely, I'm not just saying this because it's like a disclaimer or some shit, but like you definitely should not go make any decisions based on what you hear on this fucking podcast about like, what is it okay and safe in my part of the country to go use this and that drug or whatever. Like, don't take anything I'm saying as legal advice. This is a politics podcast.
Right.
If you listen to me, you're probably gonna your life is going to be ruined.
Well, also Steve's a bad lawyer, and I think that's important.
Terrible lawyer. Yeah, I said I'm a lawyer. I didn't say I'm a good one. So just take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt.
I appreciate that disclaimer. I wasn't ever going to take any legal advice from this podcast episode specifically. But
more importantly, you're just going to ignore any laws that we talk about and just go for it.
Definitely.
Yeah. So DARE is one of the major parts of this story, but the war on drugs is a much bigger story. Right. And we're not going to do it justice in one episode. And it's not the only episode we're going to talk about it. We do have a episode coming up a few episodes from now. I'm kind of thinking it's going to be episode 10, where we're going to talk about mass incarceration. And mass incarceration in the United States. I'm not going to throw any stats at you right now, but just so you know, we have an extremely disproportionate amount of people in prison in the United States compared to the rest of the world. And by that, I mean like per capita. Per the population we have way too many people in prison. It makes no fucking sense at all. And this is something I'm super passionate about. And I'm going to wait a few episodes to do a talk on mass incarceration in particular. But one of the most important pieces of that story is the war on drugs.
Right.
And that's a huge story in itself too. And
Definitely.
you can trade the actual origins of this story. And if you want the full background on like how far back it goes, and it's really, really crazy, actually goes way back to slavery. And you can tell me I'm crazy because the people who first suggested this, Michelle Alexander is one of the, she was an ACLU attorney who really started spearheading this idea. She even said, everyone called me crazy when I first started saying, I think this is an extension of the post-slavery era. And people were like, what are you talking about? You know, like the war on drugs and all that.
Now, most Americans violate drug laws in their lifetime. Most do. That's what the research shows. But the drug war, not by accident, has been waged almost exclusively in poor communities of color, even though studies have consistently shown now for decades that, contrary to popular belief, people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites, or sell. Now that defies our basic racial stereotypes about who's a drug dealer. In fact, where significant differences in the survey data appear, it frequently suggests that white youth are more likely to engage in illegal drug dealing than black youth. But that's not what you would guess by taking a peek inside our nation's prisons and jails, which are overflowing with black and brown drug offenders. In some states, 80 to 90% of all drug offenders sent to prison have been one race, African American.
But it really does date back to that. And a book I would recommend is by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, and talks all about how the criminal justice system we have right now really is the extension of the Jim Crow era that came after slavery, that was meant to be the way that, okay, now slavery is abolished, but we still need to find a way to discriminate and exploit minorities in the United States. So now we're going to use the criminal justice system to do it.
By waging the drug war exclusively in the hood, we've managed to create a vast new racial undercast in an astonishingly short period of time. Millions of people are now saddled with criminal records and legally denied the very rights supposedly won in the civil rights movement.
Where I want to start this story, because it's a kind of a, you know, only an hour podcast here, although we always go over by a few minutes, is the Nixon administration is really kind of the crazy part where this just kind of explodes, right? Because we did have a very kind of nice period of civil rights activism that happened up until Nixon, right? Like Nixon is where shit got really bad.
Real bad. That was a bad Nixon, but you get the point.
We'll play a real Nixon clip here so you can get a sense.
Listen, I don't want a president who's warm on the outside and warm on the inside too. I want one that's warm on the outside, but I want one who, when the tough decisions are made, is cold and tough and will make the right decision without fear of failure.
Definitely.
There it is.
Yeah.
So,
That's Nixon.
Yeah, he's the fucking dick. So if you guys don't know by now, Nixon was a racist piece of shit, right? Like Nixon, obviously, everyone knows famous Nixon went down for, you know, the Watergate scandal and for spying, which, by the way, is laughable. Like the Watergate scandal, someone broke into a hotel and tried to steal stuff from the DNC. Like if Trump got caught doing that right now, that wouldn't even be a scandal. It would just be like, meh, another day.
Another fucking Twitter headline. That's it.
I know. I honestly, I just think about how much our country has changed in just, what is that now? 50 something years, you know, I'm just off shooting from the hip. And so like, I don't remember the exact year of Watergate, but just like that's a whole aside point, is like how much the country freaked out about Watergate, but how soft Watergate is compared to the scandals we're looking at today, that like literally just, it's about a week's worth of news and then we're on to the next thing.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
like
definitely.
Trump is literally eating drugs right now, saying that he's consuming drugs right now that would kill people if they followed his advice.
Yeah.
And that's going to be old news in a week, you know, and it's just like next level shit. But neither here nor there. That's Nixon's most famous thing. But Nixon, you should know Nixon for really kicking off the war on drugs. So, now would be a good time to play some clips of him saying some racist fucking shit. So you get a sense for who this guy is.
There you go.
To see those monkeys from those African countries, and they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes.
What's really crazy about this, and do your own research on this, but the domestic policy chief for Richard Nixon came out after the administration, and he did an interview with Harper Magazine in which he admitted that the war on drugs was started because it was aimed at targeting Nixon's two chief enemies, which one, there was the anti-war left, basically the hippies who were protesting the Vietnam War, and two, black people.
Numerous historians and political scientists have now documented that the war on drugs was part of a grand Republican Party strategy known as the Southern Strategy of using racially coded, get tough appeals on issues of crime and welfare to appeal to poor and working class whites in the South who were resentful of, fearful of, anxious about many of the gains of African Americans in the civil rights movement. H.R. Haldeman, President Richard Nixon's former chief of staff, he explained the strategy this way, quote, "The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to." End quote.
That literally Nixon thought the enemies of his political success were hippies and black people. And so he decided, well, we can't just outlaw black people, although we did that.
Although he probably would have tried.
He would have tried, and of course we basically did that for the beginning portion of our nation's history. But we can't just outlaw being black, and we can't just outlaw being a hippie or protest, because that's literally protected under the First Amendment. But what we can do is we can try to find things that we can either make an association with these communities or find something that's already associated with some of these communities, and we can criminalize that.
People overdose on uppers and downers all the time around here.
Ready to try the good stuff, kiddies?
Don't let them fool you.
Why, you little two-timing...
And they knew this consciously. They knew even then that marijuana was not bad for you. They knew even then that the criminalization was not necessary. But what they decided, what they were doing it for, was to disrupt the communities and absolutely, put people behind bars, disenfranchise them, right? If you're eventually convicted of a felony,
right,
then you don't have the right to vote. There's it's a very complex history, right? We can get into it, and we should get into that more. But again, this goes into in great detail in Michelle Alexander's book, which I think there's an Audible version if you guys like audiobooks, whatever. But that's, I think, really important listening for anybody, any progressive. Not that everyone has time. I totally understand that. But point is, you just listen to our podcast and you'll get all the information you need. So, but the point is that this is where it started, is with Nixon. So he went out there and he started all these programs, which the government would then spend money. They criminalize all this shit to try to lock people up, basically, that are their enemies. So that was the start of it.
President Richard Nixon was the first to coin the term a war on drugs. But it was President Ronald Reagan who turned that rhetorical war into a literal one. And at the time he declared his drug war, drug crime was actually on the decline, and less than 3% of the American population identified drugs as the nation's most pressing concern.
Yeah, so then we get into the Reagan administration, which, if anyone knows anything about hip hop, knows that Reagan could probably be the entire reason there is aggressive street rap whatsoever.
Well, were you telling me that one of Killer Mike's best songs is actually all about Reagan?
Oh my God, that's an incredible song.
The end of the Reagan era. I'm like Lemma 12, old enough to understand the shit had changed forever. They declared the war on drugs like a war on terror. But what it really did was let the police terrorize whoever.
I mean, really, there's so much great rap that has come out of just insulting Reagan. It's really great. And like I said earlier, I do think, the funniest thing is the same people who were imposing racist, sanctions and policies on the black community also probably hate rap. And you know what? Gangster rap came out of, the West Coast, where the LAPD was doing these racist policies and all that. And so it's kind of,
It's
came
all
back to
tied
bite you in the
together.
ass. So in 1986, Reagan passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which created harder sentences for crack users than it did for cocaine users, which is still a problem that we still are seeing the effects from decades later at this point. So it was a 5-year minimum for anyone caught with crack. It's just crazy because crack literally was just an alternative to finding good cocaine at affordable prices. And it was easier because you didn't have to make your nose bleed out so much. And people, literally all crack is, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure everyone does know, and I'm just kind of mansplaining this, but you're just diluting the cocaine and mixing it with baking soda, cooking it and freezing it, and then selling it. So
wow. Can you say that again? I'm writing this down.
So heat your oven to 350.
Ew. Kids, cocaine and crack are my favorites. It makes you happy, sophisticated, and a better talker. And you'll forget all your troubles at home.
Yeah, right. It makes you a jerk. Cocaine can kill you faster than all the other drugs we've
Try
seen.
a little, just to see.
Risa, I know someone who's hooked on coke. Sometimes he even steals from his parents to pay for it. Cocaine is one of the most addictive drugs. Don't even try it. This looks like the way out.
Get back here.
Crack cocaine was criminalized in a different way than powdered cocaine.
Yeah.
Just because of the communities that were associated with using crack. If you didn't know that, that's so racist.
That was extremely racist. Because who did cocaine? That was a Hollywood drug. That was a
Right.
rich person drug.
It was a white person drug.
Yeah.
Powdered cocaine was for white people. Everything else was for minorities. And that was the point. That's why they criminalized crack cocaine the way they did. They gave it harsher sentences, and they also enforced it totally differently, right?
Yeah, so I mean, the drug epidemic at the time it was like especially a huge problem in Los Angeles, and so the LAPD literally created a unit called CRASH. Now, I had heard of the CRASH unit, but I didn't know what it stood for until today. CRASH stood for Community Research Against Street Hoodlums.
Are you shitting me?
That is literally what it stood for.
Holy shit.
Isn't that insane? And guys,
That's
these
like 100% straightforward, obvious.
street hoodlums?
Oh
Are
my
you kidding
God.
me? If you
What the
heard any
fuck?
of your guys' grandparents use the term street hoodlums, you know they're being racist. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, you'd be super cringe about it. Like, oh God.
this is also like, I mean, there's a lot of videos that have surfaced online. So I encourage everyone to just kind of watch some of these videos. It's crazy. I mean, you're seeing incredibly corrupt system where cops are planting drugs, they're stealing drugs, randomly shooting people, even bank robberies, and they're kind of corroborating it, all blaming the streets. There's videos of cops even tagging walls, like spray painting the walls, making it seem like average, civilians did this shit, just citizens just fucking up the walls and shit, but it was actual cops doing it. I don't know if anyone's ever seen those videos. A great example, I mean, a more recent memory where people can look at is the Straight Outta Compton movie about NWA's life, where they have that scene in the beginning where they take that huge military tank thing with the big stopper and they bang it in, knocking down the walls.
They better not find a motherfucking thing. All that shit up in the hook. Hurry up. Man, get to the back.
That was a big thing that this CRASH unit would do all the time. And this is actually a lot of people, a lot of experts in this field credit. This is the first time we really see like a new level of militarization with the police department. And this is when they first really started getting funding with military grade weapons and protection that police departments just weren't really getting before.
Right. And so they're ramping this up. They're putting all this money into this. And the question is, why? Are we really that worried about drugs? Is our government suddenly altruistic and they're just trying to help? Did possibly the Republicans figure out that they can use drugs as a way to disenfranchise people who don't typically vote for them?
Right, exactly. And this is also a really weird time with Reagan because there were so many other politics, like with the Iran-Contra thing, which is really, it all ties into this crack epidemic. I mean, and this is kind of where hip-hop comes into it, because anyone who follows any sort of modern-day rap knows the name Rick Ross. And Rick Ross is a famous rapper from Miami.
Martin had a dream, Bob got high. I still do both, but somehow I got by.
He took his name from the famous kingpin Rick Ross, who was from Los Angeles. Now, Rick Ross ties into all of this. He's very relevant to this whole story of Reagan-era crack epidemic. Rick Ross was involved in the Iran-Contra, and this is all involved here. And I just think this is a really important factor and really fascinating that crack ends up in foreign policy here even. So the whole thing
you're losing me. So Iran-Contra.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
All right. So basically Rick Ross was a street kingpin who was pretty much the guy to make crack famous, they say. Although the first crack trap house was found in Miami, I believe in 82, maybe 83. Someone could fact check me on that. I might be wrong. Rick Ross was in LA.
Oh, I'm going to fact check you, bitch.
Was just some tennis player in California, just needed some money. He was broke, and he decided he's going to start trying to buy cocaine and flip it as crack. So meanwhile, as this thing, he's getting real big. He was set up to getting $200,000 a day. So the CIA is watching Rick Ross, at the time also known as Freeway Ricky Ross. There's another rapper named Freeway. That's where he gets his name. Little fun fact. They have this guy named Blandon. Rick Ross kind of knows who this Blandon guy is. Blandon is working for the CIA.
Dick. Fucking
So
narc.
you find out this drug dealer who's working for the CIA was raising money for the Contras. So who are the Contras? The Contras were a right-wing rebel group in Nicaragua at the time who were fighting off the socialist government there because Reagan was paranoid that if he lost his proxy war in South America, the Soviets are going to take over all of South America.
Because the United States owns South America.
You know, yeah. It wouldn't have been our first time trying. Reagan wanted Congress to give them money or to go fight with the Contras down there. Congress refused, so he had to find different ways to do it. So he would fund the Contras through the National Security Council, like through their weapon sales. So what they were doing is Oliver North, who was selling weapons to Iran at the time.
Good old Oliver.
So they would take that money and just directly fund that to the Contras. So another way they decided to make money in the CIA, and this is not conspiracy Decatur talking, this is public knowledge at this point, this is all out. The CIA is getting money on the side from not only arms deals, but from crack cocaine sales. More so just letting it flow through so they could have money for the Contras. If you guys really want to get into the more heady space about this, I recommend you guys all look up a journalist by the name of Gary Webb. He was the one who really broke this story, and he kind of helped get Rick Ross all the information when he got his life sentence because he went down for all this shit. So he really helped him. The story of Gary Webb is real interesting because it's a controversial thing with a lot of conspiracy theorists if he committed suicide or if he was murdered.
And here's just, again, back to politics real quick, before we carry on. If you have any doubt what you think about drug criminalization in the United States, just consider where it started and why the war on drugs ever started in the first place.
So why declare a drug war at a time when drug crime is declining and the American population isn't much concerned about drugs? Well, the answer is that from the outset, the drug war had relatively little to do with genuine concern about drug addiction or drug abuse, and nearly everything to do with politics, racial politics.
The way that we, and not only just America, most countries around the world, we look at drugs as such this taboo, foreign fringe type of thing that happens in society. But these government history with drugs and what the CIA has done with drugs is a really important part to where we've gotten now. But yeah, so anyhow, I mean, this all happened during the Reagan administration, which is why everyone, knows that the black community and Reaganomics don't go hand in hand. They don't get along very well, and there's very good reason because of the racist policies that were put forth, and obviously the longing damage it did to not only the black community, but just impoverished communities in general.
Okay, so Nixon started this literally for the purpose of prosecuting black people and trying to disrupt those communities and ruin the lives in minority neighborhoods.
And now continued by
Reagan. Now Reagan is ramping it up, right? He's starting the DARE program, which is now just like direct, and we called it propaganda earlier, and we weren't kidding. It was propaganda because what they were doing in the DARE program is literally going into your schools and telling your children that you need to associate people who use drugs in a negative way and really start to think about the universe the way that the Reagan family wants you to think about it, right? And so now we get through the 80s and we're starting to get into the Clinton era. I'm skipping over, obviously, George Sr. And so during the early 1990s, we're now getting into probably one of the worst times in American history for criminal justice.
And soon, Democrats began competing with Republicans to prove they could be even tougher on them than their Republican counterparts. And so it was President Bill Clinton who escalated the drug war far beyond what his Republican predecessors even dreamed possible.
In the early 90s, in the mid 90s, the Clinton administration got behind the crime bill. And this has become really infamous because of when Hillary Clinton was running for president and when she was the nominee, both during the primary and after, she got a lot of flack for her support of the crime bill. And the crime bill has been largely credited with creating the current system of mass incarceration that we have. Here's a clip of her justifying why they need to create this new law. So let's play the clip.
The fourth challenge is to take back our streets from crime, gangs, and drugs. And we have actually been making progress on this count as a nation because of what local law enforcement officials are doing, because of what citizens and neighborhood patrols are doing. We're making some progress. Much of it is related to the initiative called community policing, because we have finally gotten more police officers on the street. That was one of the goals that the president had when he pushed the crime bill that was passed in 1994. But we also have to have an organized effort against gangs. Just as in a previous generation we had an organized effort against the mob. We need to take these people on. They are often connected to big drug cartels. They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel. And I believe it is now time for all of us to know what we can do individually to be part of this anti-crime, anti-gangs, anti-drug effort.
So that's Hillary Clinton. And you know what this is kind of, we use the phrase dog whistling these days, but in retrospect, now we see like, oh shit, I think she was actually being racist.
And it was President Clinton that championed laws denying federal financial aid to drug offenders for college. It was President Clinton who championed laws banning people with criminal convictions from access to public housing so that people wouldn't have housing upon release from prison. It was the Clinton administration that championed laws denying even food stamps under federal law to people who were once caught with drugs. To a large extent, the basic architecture of this new caste system was championed by a Democratic administration desperate to win back the so-called white swing voters, the folks who had defected from the Democratic Party in the wake of the civil rights movement.
And it wasn't just Hillary Clinton, right? And so what's really, really important to this story is who else was absolutely instrumental in fucking our country up in the mid-90s? Oh, Joe Biden. So Joe Biden, actually, let's play a clip of Joe Biden. I think this will sound really familiar to what you just heard Hillary Clinton say.
We must take back the streets. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them.
Super predators. Yeah, Joe. All right. So, I mean, Hillary Clinton got a lot of flack for that, but I don't hear people talking about Joe Biden quite as much, saying very similar shit. So the problem is that Joe Biden was also out there. This is in a time in American politics where the Democratic Party wanted to win again. And so they decided that they're going to be tough on crime. And this is a time where both parties were literally just competing to prove like who's tougher on crime. And now we know, and now all you guys know that's actually a super racist objective, because the whole point of the war on drugs, the way it was started, and people in the White House and close to the White House should know this, is that it was literally just targeting minorities and hippies. And so if you're out there saying tough on crime, what you're really saying is let's try to lock up all the minority communities and underprivileged communities and hippies and everybody else who opposes basically neoliberal and conservative policies. And so now the crime bill, it did a lot of things. But there's one key provision of the crime bill that was really, really important, and you'll hear Joe Biden expressly deny this. He has recently denied the fact that the crime bill had anything to do with state law, because he says it was a federal bill and it had to do with the federal criminal justice system.
Folks, let's get something straight. 92 out of every 100 prisoners behind the bars are in a state prison, not a federal prison. This idea that the crime bill generated mass incarceration, it did not generate mass incarceration.
The problem is that crime bill actually provided a shit ton of money to state jurisdictions if they would implement basically their own little war on drugs there.
Federal funding in this war has flowed to those state and local law enforcement agencies that boost the sheer volume of drug arrests. It's been a numbers game. State and local law enforcement agencies are rewarded in cash by the millions for the sheer numbers of people swept into the system for drug offenses. This helps to explain why law enforcement so often goes out looking for the so-called low-hanging fruit, stopping, frisking, searching as many people as possible, pulling as many vehicles as possible over in a search for drugs.
Now we know the war on drugs has been underway for quite a while, but this is ramping up the program to an astronomical level, where now local police agencies had the choice: do I take all this money and implement this new kind of objective to target, not new, but, ramp up our objective to target all these local level drug crimes? Or do we just say no to the money? So obviously, basically what happened from this is tons and tons of police officers around the United States were hired, and they were out there policing minority neighborhoods and low-income neighborhoods as well. Basically, the results of all of this was this huge ramp up of the war on drugs. It's all these stupid drug possession crimes, nonviolent crimes, where they're continuing in now a massive way, locking people up in untold numbers. The point is, the war on drugs has been a massive and utter fucking failure. And it's been a failure on multiple fronts. One, it's absolutely contributed to this mass incarceration crisis that we have. We have so many people in prison. We have just destroyed American families. With that backdrop, when you ask me, and what we're about to get into, what should we do about drug criminalization? I think we need to always keep in mind there are two separate questions. There's, are drugs good or bad? Right? Which is actually a really complicated conversation depending on what drug you're talking about and blah, blah, blah. And then there's, should we remove people from their families and society and put them in a cage because they use drugs or because they sold drugs? Two separate conversations. They should not be the same conversation.
Well, if you can't decide, try them all. Go ahead, boys.
They're scared of the puppy. Take a good look. That could be your future on drugs.
So, now we know drugs are bad. And
well, I'm convinced. Trump is thinking that the chloroclock. What is that shit?
Yes, it's chloroblocka-block.
The shit, do not fucking follow his direction on there.
I mean, that's honestly the wildest thing, that he's just taking an unapproved drug.
Well, he says he's taking it. I mean, that's the thing also,
he's not,
right?
He's not.
His whole mission in life right now is to try to downplay the virus, and that everyone should get back into their consumerism, because that's what his donors are demanding right now. Hey, we're seeing losses, make something happen.
My only other theory is that he's just getting allergy medicine and someone's telling him that it's this anti-malaria drug so he can be like, oh, give him the confidence. Do you think that best solution to this is decriminalizing drugs, or do you think we should go one step further and just legalize all drugs?
Well, I think it's important to lay out like what the difference is. And it sounds like it's kind of on a sliding scale and there's multiple options. Legalization just basically means the government's not really involved in drugs, right? Like it's not on the books. Decriminalization is an idea where it might still be controlled by the government, or it is still controlled by the government. There's some kind of law related to that substance. But in theory, the punishment could be maybe a fine or like you were talking about in Portugal, where they like mandate mental health counseling or whatever, depending on the drug. Schedule 1, right? Like it's like as illegal as it can be. Right? Like it's a crime for which you can go to prison just for even having it.
Marijuana, we think about it as the user, but also think about it as if someone's selling heroin versus someone selling marijuana. A heroin dealer versus a marijuana dealer is just the same. I mean, marijuana dealers, these are kids out of high school. You know what I mean? Like,
dude, seriously, it's kids in high school, right? It's like marijuana dealers are not. It's just like, give me a fucking break, man. These are kids trying to get a few extra dollars for their
There's
goddamn
no serious. Unless you're really doing it huge. There's no money to be made. Exactly.
We're talking about guys who are trying to get $50 for their fucking Call of Duty add-on.
Yeah, you're not the mom from Weeds, okay?
I think it should be treated in the exact same way that we treat alcohol, in the sense that, first of all, alcohol is a way more destructive substance than marijuana.
Another reason I hate the Irish.
Fucking drunks, all of them. But there actually is research out there right now that is showing quite negative consequences for people using marijuana when they're under 25. One of them is that if you have a predisposition to schizophrenia, for example, it could trigger that, especially if you're using it during your teen years. So there's several problems. Yeah.
We all agree across the board. Marijuana, not only decriminalize it, but legalize it. That can stop a lot of racial issues. Understand, too, that it's going faster in the decriminalizing into legalization, because now you're seeing a lot of wealthy white people getting involved in the marijuana business. John Boehner was the former Speaker of the House.
Republican.
Yeah, he was very anti-marijuana, and now he is out of politics. And what does he do? He makes a large investment into a marijuana company.
Wow.
So as soon as this shit becomes legal everywhere, best believe John Boehner's getting a big fat check. Someone associated with the rap world, Kareem Biggs Burke, who helped start Rockefeller Records with Jay-Z and Dame Dash, tried to do the same thing and was arrested under a conspiracy to selling drugs under a huge sting operation called the Green Venom Operation, which you guys can look up. Same shit John Boehner does, but when John Boehner does it, he's just a fucking guy making his money.
I like drugs, 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 I like drugs.
A more interesting conversation is, what do we do about
hard drugs?
The hard drugs, the stuff that even the Fonz would say, like, yeah, that's crazy.
Drugs that'll make you hit a jukebox and say, hey.
I had no idea I was going to be talking about the Fonz today.
You should go into every episode of this podcast thinking you're going to be talking about the Fonz.
You know, that gets into a whole debate about, like, are there some drugs that are so debilitating that you're not really in control? And that, you know, certainly from a criminal defense perspective, I really agree with that. Is like, there are drugs that make you so dissociated from your normal decision-making abilities that, like, we should not think of those people as responsible for their actions in the same way. But that also goes back to the question of, well, then what do we do about the drug itself? Like, somewhere we have to solve the problem. So here's what I think. I think that it depends on the drug. In my personal opinion, I don't think that the government should regulate it in the same way that they regulate, like, alcohol. No one should be going to prison for drugs. That's fucking crazy. You might go to prison for conduct you do while you're high.
Decriminalizing all drugs. We always talk about the negative effects of all these drugs, but we don't talk about the positive outcomes it has for some people. And I think the answer to these things is regulate, and study and figure out.
Right. There's no reason reason they can't be like prescribable, right? Like, let's control the environment that people have it in or whatever. The reality is, from the medical community, at least the readings that I'm familiar with, is that there are drugs that are just fucking destructive. To me, there's a big difference between the person selling these drugs knowing the consequences and what's going to happen to the people who use it versus like, what should we do about the guy or the girl using it? Because to me, I don't really see really any value putting someone in jail, use any kind of drug.
When we're talking about all these different sort of drugs and all that, like, we're talking PCP is dangerous. You could overdose, you could commit suicide, all these things. But you could also do that. Like, and I'm not trying to compare the two and say they're in the same ballpark, but Tylenol, man, like, people overdose on Tylenol and inside Tylenol, like, it's really easy to overdose. And if you look at that, I believe actually John Oliver or someone did a really good episode on that. Like, it's super easy to overdose on that.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean? And like, these are things that are just over the counter. And you know what I mean? And I'm not saying that PCP should be at your local Walgreens anytime soon. But I think between that, better wages, and then better science education starting off at a young age in school. I didn't anticipate when we started this podcast for me to bring up education every episode, but it seems more and more real important.
Well, it really is the answer to a lot of problems, right? I mean, I'm glad that like two progressives can debate the merits between decriminalization and total illegalization. But, you know, the reality is our country isn't anywhere near that debate. What we're in the middle of right now is still trying to figure out, is putting people in jail the right solution? Should we lock a human up in a cage because they were either selling or using drugs? And like that,
especially like how we talk about with like the CIA and the politics behind it, like these are largely by government policies. And how is that fair to lock someone up based off policy failures of an administration that you had nothing to do with?
Yeah, we know that the government genuinely was not trying to improve our country when they made these crimes. It was about trying to, at least many of these drugs that are crimes, you know, some of the more commonly prosecuted ones, it was racially motivated. It was anti-leftist motivated. It was because Nixon didn't like enemies and he was trying to find a way to get rid of them. You know, it was also an extension of Jim Crow era and slavery. So like, even if you do believe in like, well, I can't imagine a society where heroin's legal, it doesn't mean that anyone's saying this is a society where we think heroin's good. It's just a society where we don't put a human being in a cage because they either used or sold heroin. It's just the fact is that the system that we're using right now doesn't work. It's fucking ruining lives. It's disrupting families. It's like, you know, and like, so the immediate thing that I think comes to mind for a lot of people is like, well, what about parents who should be watching their kids, but instead they're out using drugs? Fair enough. We have a totally separate legal system that handles that. It doesn't need to be its own separate crime where the parent has to go to jail for it. It can be the fact that anytime that the government thinks that you're not taking care of your kids, in theory, they can take them away. That's what CPS is.
Are these your drugs?
Look, Dad, it's
Where
not...
did you get it?
Dad,
Answer me. Who taught you how to do this stuff?
You, all right? I learned it by watching you.
Parents who use drugs have children who use drugs.
So yeah, guys, I mean, yeah, I just think that I think it's good that we actually, you know, we disagree, not on a lot here, but there's a little wiggle room. But I do think what the important part is that we do recognize that we should not criminalize the victims in an atrocious drug war, and realize that, you know, drugs are never going away, and it's a taboo that we don't talk about because we think it's some weird topic, just how we view sex, drugs, aliens, all in the same fringe light, when really these are things that, I mean, minus the alien part, these are things that we all do, especially aliens.
Yeah. We all know an alien that we're harboring in our closet.
We all know Josh the alien.
Yeah.
We all make fun of him for his American name. But
so, you know, when you're about to light up, just remember, you know, it's a federal crime, and that's really all I wanted you guys to know.
Thanks, guys.
Take nothing else from this.
Thanks for continually listening. Thanks for showing your friends. Please, 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 if you can, go to superpoliticsshow.com, and also maybe if you can, just check out patreon.com/superpoliticsshow. We're going to have some bonus from this one where I convinced Steve to do PCP. And We're going to play an old jam from me right now going out.
Let's play it. Let's play it.
All right. See you guys.
See ya.
I like drugs, 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 bitch, drugs, I like drugs, I like drugs, I like drugs, bitch, in case you didn't know, I like drugs. I like drugs, yes, I like drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, heroin, next to me. I like drugs, 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 bitch, drugging, bitch, I'm drugging, bitch, I like drugs, 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 ho.
So drugs don't have any power over you unless you let them. And that's our report. Oh yeah, and they're illegal too.